Captain Jiho floated in and out of consciousness as rough hands dragged him across cold metal floors. His head throbbed where they had struck him during the ambush. 3 days ago, he had been exploring an uncharted sector near the outer rim when the alien warships appeared from nowhere. His small research vessel never stood a chance. The creatures that captured him were unlike anything he had seen before. They stood over 2 meters tall with thick, scaled skin that shimmered in shades of green and bronze. Their eyes were vertical slits that glowed yellow in the dim corridors of their ship. They called themselves the Drathack, and they spoke in hissing voices that made his skin crawl. Jiho tried to remember his training from the Korean Space Force, but nothing prepared him for this. He was a scientist, not a soldier. His mission was to study distant planets and collect samples, not to fight alien warriors. Now he wished he had listened more carefully during combat training instead of focusing only on his geology reports. The Drathack threw him into a small cell where he spent what felt like days. Through the narrow window, he could see stars passing by as the ship traveled through space. They were taking him somewhere, but he had no idea where or why. Other prisoners were kept in nearby cells, but they were all Drathack citizens. They whispered fearfully among themselves in their strange language. Finally, the ship landed with a heavy thud. The guards came for Jiho, binding his wrists with energy cuffs that burned against his skin. They marched him down a long ramp onto the surface of an alien world. The sky above was a deep purple, and 2 moons hung low on the horizon. Thousands of Drathack citizens lined the streets, watching as Jiho and other prisoners were paraded through their capital city. The aliens pointed at him and made sounds that might have been laughter. Some threw rotten fruit that splattered against his uniform. Children stared with wide eyes, their parents pulling them back as if Jiho was some kind of monster. He kept his head up and his face neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing his fear. They brought him to a massive stone arena carved into the side of a mountain. The structure was ancient, with walls covered in strange symbols and images of great beasts. The Drathack pushed Jiho through dark tunnels lit by torches. The air grew hotter with each step, and he could smell something like sulfur mixed with old blood. At last, they reached a platform overlooking an enormous pit. Jiho's stomach dropped as he looked down into the darkness below. The pit was at least 100 meters deep, with walls of smooth black rock that would be impossible to climb. Steam rose from volcanic vents at the bottom, and scattered across the floor were white shapes that Jiho realized with horror were bones. A Drathack priest stepped forward, wearing elaborate robes covered in gold symbols. He spoke in a booming voice that echoed across the arena. Though Jiho could not understand most of the words, his translator device caught fragments. Sacrifice. Appeasement. The Great Scaled One. Unworthy outsider. The crowd of thousands roared their approval. Jiho felt his heart racing as he understood what was about to happen. They were going to throw him to some creature that lived in that pit. Some kind of monster that they worshipped as a god. Before he could protest or fight back, the guards released his energy cuffs and shoved him toward the edge. Jiho stumbled, his arms windmilling as he tried to regain balance, but it was too late. He fell forward into the darkness, the screams of the crowd fading as wind rushed past his ears. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his shoulder and ribs. For several moments he could not breathe. When his vision finally cleared, Jiho looked up at the tiny circle of purple sky far above. Then he heard it. A sound that made his blood turn to ice. Something massive was moving in the shadows and it was breathing fire. Jiho rolled to the side just as a blast of flames scorched the ground where he had been lying. The heat was so intense that his uniform began to smoke. He scrambled behind a large boulder and pressed his back against the cool stone, gasping for air. Through the dim light from volcanic vents, he finally saw the creature. It was massive beyond imagination. The dragon stretched at least 50 meters from its horned head to the tip of its spiked tail. Its scales were dark red and black, hardened like ancient armor. 4 legs ended in claws as long as swords, and its wings were folded against its body like leather sails. Yellow eyes, each the size of Jiho's head, stared in his direction with ancient intelligence. The creature moved slowly, almost lazily, as if it had all the time in the world. Jiho realized with a sinking feeling that this dragon had probably killed hundreds of sacrifices before him. To this beast he was just another meal. But Jiho had no intention of dying here. He forced himself to think clearly despite the fear clawing at his mind. His training as a scientist kicked in. Observe. Analyze. Find patterns. The dragon had paused after breathing fire. It stood still for nearly 30 seconds before moving again. A cool-down period. The creature needed time to build up heat for another attack. Jiho looked around frantically for anything he could use. The floor of the pit was covered in volcanic rock, broken bones, and pieces of old armor from previous victims. He spotted a long piece of metal, probably from a spear. It was crude and rusty, but it was better than nothing. He grabbed it while keeping his eyes on the dragon. The beast roared, a sound so loud that rocks fell from the walls above. It charged forward with surprising speed for something so large. Jiho ran, using the scattered boulders as cover. His ribs screamed in pain from his fall, but adrenaline kept him moving. The dragon's claws struck stone behind him, sending sparks flying. For hours, Jiho played this deadly game of cat and mouse. He learned the dragon's patterns. It favored its right side, always turning that way first. Its left rear leg moved with a slight limp, suggesting an old injury. After breathing fire, it always paused. These small details became his lifeline. When the dragon rested, Jiho worked quickly. He found more pieces of bone and metal scattered around the pit. Using strips of leather from torn armor, he began crafting simple tools. A sharp piece of volcanic glass became a knife. A long bone wrapped in leather became a better weapon than the rusty spear. He was building an arsenal from the remains of those who had failed before him. Night fell in the pit, or what passed for night. The purple sky above turned dark, and the only light came from the glowing volcanic vents. The dragon seemed to settle down in the eastern corner of the pit, curling its massive body around something Jiho could not see. It watched him with one eye open but made no move to attack. Jiho found a defensible position between two large rocks. From here he could see most of the pit and had escape routes in multiple directions. His body ached everywhere and his throat was dry as sand. He needed water desperately. Then he noticed moisture collecting on the cooler rocks near the walls. Carefully he moved to these areas and licked the dampness. It tasted of minerals, but it was water. As he crouched there in the darkness, drinking tiny amounts of moisture, Jiho noticed something strange on the wall. Scratches in the stone, deliberate and organized. He moved closer, holding up a piece of glowing volcanic rock for light. His heart nearly stopped. The markings were in Korean. Someone from Earth had been here before him, and they had left a message carved into the stone. Jiho traced the carved symbols with trembling fingers. The message was old, the edges worn smooth by time, but the Korean characters were still readable. It said, Commander Yuna. Earth Vessel Sejong. Year 2187. The beast guards its weakness. Strike beneath the jaw where old wound never healed. May you succeed where I failed. That was 40 years ago. Jiho felt a chill run down his spine. Another human had been thrown into this pit decades before him, and she had studied the dragon just as he was doing now. She had found its weakness but apparently never lived to exploit it. He wondered if her bones were among the hundreds scattered across the pit floor. But she had given him hope. The dragon had a vulnerable spot under its jaw. Jiho just needed to figure out how to reach it. The problem was obvious. The dragon's head was 10 meters above the ground when it stood normally. He would need to either bring the beast down or find a way to climb up to that height while it attacked him. For 3 days, Jiho prepared his trap. He barely slept, taking only short rest periods when the dragon seemed calm. He ate the small cave creatures that crawled near the volcanic vents. They tasted terrible but gave him protein and energy. He collected water from the rocks and forced himself to stay sharp. Above him, the Drathack spectators had grown quiet. Usually sacrifices died within minutes or hours. Jiho had survived 3 full days and the aliens did not know what to make of it. Their priests gathered at the edge of the pit, arguing among themselves in heated voices. Some looked angry. Others looked afraid. Jiho worked on the western side of the pit where several large stalactites hung from the ceiling. These stone formations were already cracked from age and heat. He spent hours carefully chipping away at their bases with his sharpest tools, weakening them until they hung by threads of stone. Then he used strips of leather to create trigger lines, primitive but effective. The hardest part was creating something to anger the dragon enough to charge at full speed. Jiho took the risk during one of the beast's rest periods. He crept close to the eastern corner where it always slept. There, protected by the dragon's coiled body, was a clutch of 3 massive eggs. This was what the creature guarded so carefully. Jiho did not want to harm the eggs, but he needed the dragon's full attention. He picked up a rock and threw it, striking one egg with a sharp crack. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The dragon exploded into motion with a roar that shook the entire pit. Its eyes blazed with rage and smoke poured from its nostrils. Jiho ran as he had never run before. His injured ribs sent shooting pain through his chest, but he ignored it. The dragon charged behind him, faster than it had ever moved before, its massive claws tearing up the stone floor. Jiho sprinted directly toward his trap, pulling the leather trigger lines as he dove to the side. The weakened stalactites fell like massive spears. Most missed, but 2 struck the dragon's left wing and back. The beast roared in pain and stumbled. More rocks fell from the ceiling, broken loose by the impact. A large piece struck the dragon's shoulder and it crashed to the ground. But Jiho had also miscalculated. A falling rock caught him across the leg and he felt something crack. He tried to stand but collapsed with a cry of pain. His left leg would not support his weight. Blood ran down from a gash on his forehead, making it hard to see. The dragon was hurt but not defeated. It struggled to its feet, one wing hanging at an odd angle. Both of them were wounded now, both breathing hard. The beast turned its massive head toward Jiho, and in its ancient eyes he saw something unexpected. Not just rage but recognition. Jiho dragged himself backward, leaving a trail of blood on the stone floor. His makeshift spear lay several meters away, far beyond his reach. The dragon limped toward him, its damaged wings scraping against the ground. This was the end. He had fought well, survived longer than anyone expected, but now his luck had run out. The dragon stopped 3 meters away. Its massive head lowered until its yellow eyes were level with Jiho's face. Hot breath washed over him, smelling of sulfur and ash. Jiho waited for the flames that would end his life. Instead, the dragon simply stared at him. Long moments passed in silence. Then the creature did something strange. It turned its head and used its snout to push something across the floor toward Jiho. A dead cave creature, freshly killed. Food. Jiho stared in confusion. Why would the dragon feed him? Over the next hour, the dragon made no aggressive moves. It settled down nearby, watching Jiho with what almost seemed like curiosity. When Jiho tried to crawl toward the water-collecting rocks, the dragon shifted its massive body to create a path for him. It was allowing him to drink. Jiho's scientific mind raced to understand. This was not the behavior of a mindless monster. The dragon showed intelligence, even mercy. He thought back to everything he had observed. The way it guarded its eggs so carefully. The deliberate pattern of its movements. The fact that it always stayed in this pit, never trying to escape even though its wings could surely carry it out. Something was wrong with this entire situation. As the dragon rested, Jiho pulled himself closer, fighting through the pain in his leg. He needed to see something. The beast watched him approach but did not move. When Jiho reached its massive head, he could see details he had missed before. Scars covered the dragon's scales, old wounds from many battles. But there was something else. At the base of its skull, partially hidden by scales, was a metal device. Jiho's breath caught. It was technology, alien in design but clearly mechanical. Small lights blinked in a steady rhythm, and thin wires extended into the dragon's flesh like parasitic roots. He had seen similar neural control devices in his research, though never this advanced. This device connected directly to the dragon's brain. Understanding flooded through him like ice water. The dragon was not a willing guardian. It was a prisoner just like him. The Drathack had enslaved this magnificent creature, forcing it to kill their sacrifices through pain and neural control. Every time someone was thrown into the pit, the device probably activated, driving the dragon into violent rage. Jiho looked into the dragon's eyes and saw intelligence looking back at him. Trapped awareness. The beast knew what was happening to it but could not stop. How many years had it suffered like this? How many innocent creatures had it been forced to kill against its will? The dragon made a low sound, almost like a moan. It shifted its head, deliberately exposing the neural device to Jiho. The message was clear. Help me. Above them, the Drathack spectators had grown agitated. They shouted and pointed at the scene below. Their priests looked terrified. This was not supposed to happen. The sacrifice was supposed to die, not communicate with their sacred beast. Jiho made his decision. His leg was broken, he was trapped in this pit and he would probably die here. But if he was going to die, he would die doing something meaningful. He would free this creature from its torment. Using his crude knife made from volcanic glass, Jiho began examining the neural device up close. The dragon held perfectly still, despite what must be incredible pain. The device was complex, with multiple connection points buried deep in the creature's flesh. Removing it would be like surgery, delicate and dangerous. One wrong cut could kill them both. But Jiho had not survived 4 days in this hell just to give up now. He steadied his shaking hands and began to work. Jiho's hands trembled as he positioned the sharp volcanic glass against the first wire. Sweat dripped into his eyes despite the cool air near the dragon's scales. One mistake and the device might send a fatal shock through the creature's brain. Or worse, it might trigger the dragon to attack him involuntarily. The dragon remained motionless, its massive body barely breathing. Jiho could feel trust radiating from the ancient beast. It was placing its life in his hands, just as he was trusting it not to kill him. He took a deep breath and made the first cut. The wire snapped with a small spark. The dragon flinched but held still. A low rumble came from deep in its chest, a sound of pain endured. Jiho worked faster now, cutting through wire after wire. Some were buried so deep he had to dig them out with his fingers, feeling the dragon's hot blood on his hands. Above them, the Dradhak priests were screaming orders. Guards appeared at the edge of the pit with weapons. They fired energy blasts that struck the rocks around Jiho and the dragon, trying to stop what was happening. But they were too far away to aim accurately, and they seemed afraid to hit their sacred beast. The final wire was the thickest, connected directly to the base of the dragon's skull. Jiho could see it pulsing with energy, keeping the control device active. This was the one that mattered most. He gripped his knife firmly and began to saw through it. The device started beeping rapidly, a warning sound. The dragon's body tensed, muscles bunching beneath its scales. The neural spike was fighting back, sending pain signals to force the dragon into one final attack. Jiho could see the creature's eyes rolling, fighting against the commands being burned into its brain. "Hold on," Jiho whispered in Korean, even though he knew the dragon could not understand his words. "Just a few more seconds." The wire split apart. The device went dark, its lights dying one by one. For a moment nothing happened. Then the dragon's entire body shuddered. The neural spike fell away from its skull, clattering onto the stone floor like a dead insect. The roar that followed was unlike anything Jiho had heard before. It was not rage or pain but pure joy and triumph. The sound echoed through the pit and beyond, rolling across the Dradhak city like thunder. The dragon's voice carried power and authority that had been chained for too long. Other sounds answered from far away. Across the planet, in other pits and dungeons, more dragons were roaring in response. They had heard their brother's call to freedom. The dragon spread its wings, even the damaged one, and launched itself into the air. Jiho grabbed onto the scales of its neck, holding on with desperate strength despite his broken leg. They rose up through the pit like a rocket, faster and faster, toward the circle of purple sky above. The Dradhak scattered in terror as the dragon burst from the pit. Guards fired their weapons but the energy blasts bounced harmlessly off the dragon's thick scales. The beast landed in the center of the arena, and Jiho slid down to the ground, his injured leg finally giving out completely. Dragons were emerging from pits all across the city now. The sky filled with their massive forms, creatures that had been enslaved for generations finally breaking free. But they did not attack the Dradhak people. Instead, they simply flew away toward the mountains, taking back their freedom. Jiho's dragon turned back to look at him one last time. In its ancient eyes was gratitude deeper than words. Then it spread its wings and leaped into the sky, joining its kin in their flight to freedom. A human rescue ship arrived 3 days later, drawn by Jiho's emergency beacon. They found him unconscious in the abandoned arena, surrounded by confused Dradhak who no longer had gods to worship. The empire built on enslaving dragons had collapsed in a single day. As they carried Jiho to the medical bay, he smiled despite his pain. He had survived not by killing his enemy but by freeing it. The end.